Welcome, Network for New Music audiences. We're really pleased to have Roberto Pace featured on our next event, his solo on Puryear, performed by Mary Javian. And today he's agreed to sit down with us for a few minutes and tell us about himself and a little bit about his music. So Roberto, you are a respected composer, music director, pianist, and educator. And your activities really combine all of these. So I was wondering if you could just give us a brief introduction to yourself, your background, and what brought you to Philadelphia.
My earliest remembrance of music is that I had an uncle, and this was in the early 50s, and he had a recording of Gounod Faust or something. And he was what you call a hi-fi buff or something, which then was like on the cutting edge, whatever. And I remember being enthralled with the music. It just was very moving to me. So I was living with my grandparents. My mother was between marriages, and so they lived in Rye, New York, and I had lived with my mother in the Lower East Side up until then, and I spent 1 year there, and that's where I heard this music. We moved to Portchester, New York, which was at that time was a very industrialized haven for immigrants. Mm-hmm. So most of the people in my class were Italian immigrants, Polish immigrants, and African American people were there in equal parts. So we had 10 of each. It was just equally apportioned. And to me, that was great fun. However, Portchester had all at that time had all of the problems of the city, but none of the cultural benefits. So coming across music and being able to get into music, my first opportunity was when I was given a trumpet in the 3rd grade. And that really set me on a path that I've maintained since then. And then we did have once a week, the music teacher would come in. Of course, the teacher would be aggravated because most of the people were not into it and they didn't practice. But I did very well, and eventually they saw that I had ability as a musician. My grandmother had a piano, and she gave it to me because she saw I had that ability, and I had some music lessons. So fast forward a little bit from there, my mother picked us up and left to go to Massachusetts to get away from an abusive situation. And as it turned out, there was a scholarship at the Cape Cod Conservatory. So I had piano lessons there, and that was really good. The piano teacher was a proponent of Lechetivsky technique of the piano. And as soon as I was able to play, I started composing. And the great thing about being up there in Massachusetts, actually on the elbow of Cape Cod and Chatham, I was able to have time for myself, and I walked on the beach, and I started to hear melodies, and so I had that isolation, that time to myself. And so I would run home and try to figure out what the tones were if I couldn't hear them perfectly, and write them down on paper. And that's how I started writing for the piano. So first I started writing the piano, then I figured, well, maybe I could do piano and cello. Maybe I could do this. Maybe I can write a piece for voice. Maybe I try that. And so I gradually branched out. And people sponsored me to go to New England Conservatory, to the preparatory division there. And that was just very lucky. But being the urban kind of boy that I was in a rural environment at that time, I'm not talking about the summer people that come to Cape Cod, I'm talking about being there. Wonderful people, but nonetheless, I was not quite a fit there. So I can't realize where I'm going with this.
Well, you said you were starting off with telling us about the first experience of listening to opera, And then you were also
Yeah.
playing cello at the same time, and then you combined that with piano, and then you had that perfect environment, that sort of
Mm.
contemplative space to be able to
Yes,
think
what it
about
was, yes, what it was,
composition.
people were very, they were good to me, but I was an outsider, you know, so that helped with isolation and being able to do, uh, being able to focus on my music. And so because I was like an outfitter and an outsider, and because I had issues, okay, uh, then I went to this place called Townsend Academy, which was an island off of Boston. Okay, so it was a home for wayward boys. Okay, but I was able to go to take lessons at the New England Conservatory Preparatory Division. So I've been very lucky at just to have certain events occur at crucial moments in my development.
Now, you've also worked extensively in theater and dance.
Yes.
Could you tell us a little bit about that experience?
Right. Well, even in high school, they did Jean Henri the Lark and about Joan of Arc. And so I found that I could write theater music well too, you know, and take people that, you know, guys that are supposed to be soldiers. To some, she is a virgin maid. To us, she is a noble blade. You know, and it was really fun to get something that people could actually sing and get enthused about. And then I wrote a pavan and different pieces for that. A little thing on the recorder for the shepherd when Joan of Arc was having a vision. And so even though that my music became very quickly chromatic and abstract, I was always able to write pieces in keys as well. And so when I left Boston after having a scholarship at New England Conservatory, again, which was extraordinary, I don't know how that happened, but it did. So then when I moved to New York, after living briefly in Italy, actually, in Rome and then in Milan, when I came back to New York, I just took every opportunity. So I started to play for dances, for dance studios. I started playing dance studio in September, and by December, I was doing rehearsals with Dance Theater of Harlem.
Mm-hmm.
And so I did some briefly touring with them. And I found that was very hard if you were in a relationship to to be on tour, especially when you're so young, you know. And but I still maintained a connection to the dance world. Then I started playing with Alvin Ailey. I
Mm-hmm.
was very lucky to meet Judith Jamison, Dudley Williams, and Alvin Ailey. It was such a wonderful, warm, inclusive environment. And so New York has been very good to me. So in between that kind of work, like touring or playing, I also found that I was teaching. So I started teaching so that I wouldn't be traveling all the time. So I taught at the Newark Community Center of the Arts and became the theory director there. And then Dorothy Maynard kind of recruited me to do the same thing at the Harlem School of the Arts. So I had you know, I was kind of grounded in teaching. And through a strange series of events, even though that I don't have any degrees, I didn't have any degrees because at a certain point, Gunther Schuller and of blessed memory, so wonderful, they said that, well, either your piano or your composition, and there's no artist diploma. So I had already started with the artist diplomas. I actually never had the what do you call it, bachelor degree, and so I just left Boston and I lived in Italy. Then I came to New York City, and that's when I started doing that. So I've always had this trying to balance between the academic place where it gives you some kind of stability and then playing out. And so in New York, not only did I play for a lot of dancers, I played for almost every school and company in New York, really. A ballet theater, I did 13 spots on Sesame Street with Suzanne Farrell, and you know, on PBS, and then writing for theater. somehow I became music director at Fordham at Lincoln Center. And I
Mhm.
was at Fordham at Lincoln Center for 13 years. And then we did various shows there. Probably one of the highlights was with Ben Harney, who was the original Tin Man of the Wiz,
Mhm.
directed there. And I had, guess what, the brass section from Broadway, in my orchestra,
Yeah.
and plus other people that I had worked with, wonderful professional people playing percussion. It was a 20-piece orchestra. And so that's the kind of thing I did. We did, and then writing music for all sorts of plays, all sorts of Shakespeare plays, Brendan being Playboy of the Western World. And later I did Blood Wedding with Martin Santangelo from Madrid, Noche de Flamenco. And so New York was just, that's the place where I really received so much information and was able to exercise my energies.
Yeah, it sounds like being in New York was your education.
Yes, absolutely.
In the past comment, just previously, you mentioned something about composition, and that you were writing sort of abstract composition, but also tonal composition.
Mhm.
And I wanted to use that as an opportunity to pivot into discussing solo on Puryear, because while it is a concert piece, it does have a visual component. So there's sort of an element of abstraction to it, and an element uh, of combining the visuals with the music. And I think that sort of brings in maybe the theatrical element, because in Mary's performance, as we'll all see, it is somewhat theatrical in her playing. So I'm wondering if you could just talk about the coming together of those influences in solo on Puryear.
Well, first of all, I got the message from Linda Reichert. She said, we have this thing. Are you interested to do this? I said, well, of course. you know, I'm always thinking about music, and I've been fortunate to have a fairly steady stream of commissions. And so then I found out that this was a response to the Prince of Martin Puryear. Now, a lot of the composers that were in that project claimed that they knew his work intimately, but maybe that's true. But I certainly did not. Since I have done a lot of collaboration, having done opera as a conductor and as a composer, and theater, theater writing or directing music, I looked at this as another opportunity to interface.
Mm-hmm.
So I have to say, as I had mentioned to you in private earlier, that I'm somewhat suspicious about this kind of thing. Music plus this and music plus that, and then I could say, well, if you want a string trio, why don't you just why don't you just commission that piece? However, I did enjoy the opportunity it gave me an excuse to look at the work of this artist, not only his prints, but his sculpture. And of course, he's a wonderful artist. So people will say, is this your inspiration? I don't look at it as inspiration. I look at it as communication between people. Just as I'm talking to you, you and I are trying to understand each other and communicate and have interchange. So I looked at the images, and I looked at some film of him and being in Japan, and just trying to get a sense of this person and this person's work. So I took that very seriously. Now, the project was to do something for solo instrument. So even though that these are the prints, I cannot help but not also think about the mass of the sculpture. So double bass. I picked double bass. What's your second choice? Double bass. All right. So that was the first thing. So that's my response, is that looking at the work and given the choice of double bass, cello, violin, viola, I choose double bass.
Yeah. It sounds like you were really committed to the double bass, and as we know, Mary's really committed to performing it, and
Oh, well,
she
that
does
was exciting too,
an
to know,
outstanding
because I
job.
knew that Mary's playing. So we went, oh, even better. Okay, great. So yes, the, I ask myself what I always ask myself: what would I like to hear coming out of this instrument? And of course, not being a specifically a double bass player myself, I wanted to watch people playing, and I watched master classes from former principal bassist of the Berlin Philharmonic. I
Mhm.
watched Ron Carter.
Mhm.
I watched numerous people, and I was very fortunate to know Israel Cachao Lopez,
Mhm.
who was the inventor with his brother Orestes of mambo bass. So thinking about the double bass, thinking about the sound, the resonance of the double bass. Uh, uh, when I was watching Ron Carter, he does one thing which I actually did not use, maybe perhaps at the end. It's like playing, and you pick the string and you slide, and you don't pick the string again, but then you slide again. So
Mhm.
because the strings are so long and they're slack, and then you can you
Yeah.
can continue it. And of course, the thing is, even though that I've written extensively for violins and violas and cellos, not orchestrally double bass, but this okay, that we talk about 9 minutes here on this one instrument. So there's a fellow in the UK. His name is Derry John, and it's called the Contemporary Double Bass. You should look it up. And he shows you every possible color that is possible on the double bass. I mean, it is a huge gift, and I'm embarrassed that he has one of those names that's like a series of first names, but it's called the Contemporary or the Modern Double Bass. And so, because of the abstract nature of Puryear, it's abstract, but it's also grounded. And perhaps I said in my introduction something about the nature of looking at the piece and the kind of resonance that it elicits. And so you try to find those resonances that are also your resonance too. So you're trying to find the points of intersection so that the piece is honest. But I wanted to have the widest possible variety of colors, because I wanted the colors to correspond. So color, not as like, hey, this sounds cool, but rather you'll see that at cadence points, these colors are introduced, and they kind of correspond to each other throughout the piece.
Yeah,
Uh,
it's a great piece, Roberto, and we're
Thank
so pleased to have it
you. Oh,
on our program. Could you in conclusion, could you tell us what you're working on now and what you've been doing during the pandemic?
uh, when the pandemic was hitting, I was about ready to have the choral piece done, and of course that didn't happen. That's on a poem of William Wordsworth.
Hmm.
That was a commission uh, to be done at Settlement Music School for the chorus through Ben Auger. And
Where you currently teach,
I
yes?
do teach there, yes. I have some marvelous students there who are doing very well. So the looking for the text was the hardest part, because somebody wanted something about nature. Somebody that I can't remember what the constraints were, but they were not constraining at all. So in looking for a text, I mean, I looked at, Black Elk Speaks. I looked at the Dalai Lama. I looked at the Psalms and the Proverbs. I have read a lot of English and a lot of poetry, and I did pass through Wordsworth, but I didn't find anything. But I found a part of a piece, reflections on revisiting the River Nye.
Hmm.
I guess that's in Wales, and the light of setting suns and the round ocean and the living air. I was like, okay, I'm going to do that. Forget that. And so I was very excited about that piece, and it was just for soprano and altos. consequently, when I went up there, since I knew there would not be a performance, and I had a very lot of positive feedback from people about that piece, so I made it for a full chorus. So I arranged that. Also, I completed this guitar piece, a piece for solo guitar. This is where we are today. we're in the age of solos. And that's all right. And I'm very excited. I've just been finishing my series of working with Brendan Evans, who is the dedicatee for that. Guitar people have been asking me for a piece for a long time, and might have mentioned to you, it's like, okay, then now we have 6 strings. Oh, I don't know about that. And you know, again, I did my work, I did my research, so that what do I want to hear coming out of that? So I wrote this fantasy I call Fantasia, because I don't want people saying Fantasia, and for guitar. And so Brendan is just on the point of recording that. He's going to put out a video of accessible on his site. And also this fellow in Brazil, Daniel Murray, with a very non-Brazilian sounding name, who is 100% Brazilian. He's also interested. He's going to play that piece. I'm working on something now, but I don't really talk too much about it right now. I just have material and I just like listening. Haven't committed to what the exact instrumentation is. And also a documentary, which is on the life of Charles Middleburg. He was a man that grew up in France. He was a little boy. He was Jewish, and he had a happy childhood. And then he was singing with the children in the chorus in Paris, you know, for the whole country. The kids, they would sing it once a week. They would sing for the whole country. And, you know, he's a kid, 9 or 10 years old. He's like happy. And then, so evidently a soldier came in and says, I'm going to go through these names. Okay, this Auberge, Berceau, and then he said, I knew when he got to M that I was going to have a trouble. His name was Mittelberg. And he was told, well, this is Mittelberg. This is not a French name, so you have to go. So that's how it starts. That's how it starts. You start, so the documentary is the life of this man who is now 92 years old, marvelous, lovely human being, wonderful guy. And he lost his mother. His father came back a skeleton, but the father survived. And it's just about how he had to go into hiding in the countryside. Then he wanted to be back in Paris, so they converted him to Catholicism. He had to learn the catechism. He had to hide in plain sight. He had to pass for being not Jewish. So this is not a Holocaust film. This is about how this person living his life, just simple, happy-go-lucky child. Things happen and how they ramp up and how eventually the people can't hide anymore. And how he came to the United States, and he's lived a very good life here. He's a wonderful human being. So I'm very pleased because now the funding is starting to become possible. So that I guess that's all. That's what I'm doing right now.
Roberto, it sounds like you've been exceptionally busy these past few months. So we're so happy that you were able to make time for this interview today. And again, we're really, really pleased to feature your music on our next event. So I hope everyone will tune in and you'll keep us posted about some of those recordings that you were just describing. So,
thank you, Thomas. This is an extraordinary pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Roberto.